Welcome to Litpoetry, the podcast where we go on a journey of discovery, reading, analyzing, and discussing great poetry from around the world. Poetry is worth it because the reading and writing of poetry is a revolutionary act that has the potential to transform both the reader and our world.
Welcome to the Lit Poetry Podcast Season 2. My name is James Laidler, Australian poet, writer and your host. In today's episode we'll be travelling down the aisle together, but don't be alarmed, this is no adventure into a landscape of white dresses, confetti, wedding speeches and drunk uncles. No, the aisles here we'll be traversing are ones lined with tin cans, plastic bottles and offers of 50% discounts. Welcome to your everyday supermarket. In this episode we'll be travelling with the figure of Scottish poet Ali Whitelock as she slowly cuts her way up and down the supermarket aisles of loss and lament after the death of her own father. This is a very harrowing poem. In this commodified wasteland of the supermarket, full of endless shelves of disposable emotions, we'll bear witness to Ali as she enters into a deep state of retail purgatory rather than retail therapy. This is a mesmerising and raw poem that haunts your senses. It is deeply human, full of complex, competing emotions, and it speaks to the confusion of reconciling the wounds we carry through our lives. This is a dark but beautiful poem, and it's about time I put it on. So may I introduce you to If You Have No Eyes, Where Do the Tears Go? By Ali Whitelock. This poem comes from Ali's recently published collection, The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair, published by Wakefield Press.
If You Have No Eyes, Where Do the Tears Go? By Ali Whitelock. The emotions are half price on Tuesdays. You are lured in after your father's funeral by the fluoro lights, bright as the mushroom cloud you're not meant to look directly into, lest it burn the eyes right out of your fucking head. If you have no eyes, where do the tears go? You go inside, pull your collar up, sink your unexpectedly wet base into the V of your jumper. Make like the woman who cut the coupon from the newspaper and won the 3-minute trolley dash at the local supermarket. Take a trolley that does not require the coin you never have. On your mark, get set, go. Aisle 1. Baked beans, corned beef, 2 fruits and syrup. Sadness. Move quickly. Sadness is on special. Take a dozen cans. Check date. Make sure it has long best before. Aisle 2. Ajax, Napisan, stain remover, disappointment. Throw in a dozen cans of disappointment. Reconsider. Take spares. Aisle 3. Toothpaste, mouthwash, sanitary towels, anger. Empty shelves of anger. Get second trolley. Advise girl on tannoy you will need assistance to the car. Aisle 4. Dog meat, cat litter, sardines, regret. Throw in a few, but then again too few to mention. Turn out of aisle 4, past the yogurt's culturing better days, the free-range eggs in their supermarket cage, the low-fat cottage cheese you used to buy in your teens when you were trying to disappear. Aisle 5, frozen peas, dim sum, Linda McCartney hot dogs, forgiveness. Seeping from freezers like fog, wipe a circle in the condensation on the glass door. Press your eye up against it, Stare in at the piles of forgiveness stacked neatly in convenient 250-gram blocks. Open the door. Take a single block in your hand. It is lighter than you imagined. Turn to your trolley, already overflowing with the anger and rage, the disappointment and the hardly any regret, and consign the 250-gram block of forgiveness back to its fog. Aisle 6. Strawberry ice cream, coconut froyo, lemon sorbet, comfort. Take 10 tubs of comfort, 2 of the sorbet, 4 of the coconut froyo. Though you do not really know what froyo is, it sounds like it might be happiness. Make way to checkout. Pile half-price emotions on conveyor belt. Pay your bill. The girl tannoys for car assistance. Once in your car, you momentarily consider going back for even just one single block of forgiveness. You decide against it. Turn the key in your ignition. Head for the exit. Forgiveness is on ice. You know it will keep.
So welcome back to the Litpoetry podcast. Ali Whitelock is a Scottish poet and writer living on the south coast of Sydney. Her latest poetry collection, The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair, is published by Wakefield Press, Adelaide. Her debut collection, And My Heart Crumples Like a Coke Can, also is published by Wakefield Press. Her memoir, Poking Seaweed with a Stick and Running Away from the Smell, by Wakefield Press and Polygon, was launched at the Sydney Writers' Festival to critical acclaim. Ali has read at festivals and events around the world, including the Edinburgh International Book Festival in 2019 and the Edinburgh Fringe in 2018 and 19. So welcome, Ali, to the podcast. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, James. Just listening to that poem and your interpretation of it, and the hearing someone else read your work in such a powerful way is an extraordinary experience as a poet.
Yeah. I can't imagine that experience. I mean, I write poetry, but I haven't had somebody do that for me, and it might be quite disorientating, I imagine.
I didn't know what to expect, and I'm really blown away by what you've done with the poem. You know, I was sitting here listening to it and almost listening to it as someone who didn't even write it. It was really, beautifully narrated, and the music that you chose couldn't have been more perfect. And
yeah, well, it was a bit of a process to get to that piece of music, because I did send you a few early versions where I really, I think, missed the mark in my interpretation, which was interesting. And I went much more for a sort of kitsch, sort of commercialised sort of feel to it. But I think, after discussion with you and going back to the drawing board, I think it turned out really well. And my test for this is that my wife loves this poem. And interesting, this is the first poem that I've published on the channel where I haven't included the lyrics down, not the lyrics, the lines down the bottom, which is pretty interesting. And that was actually off the back of my partner's suggestion, that she thought it just distracted from the experience.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I sometimes wonder about whether I really do want to read words along with someone else narrating a poem. I don't know. I think it does take away something from the complete immersion into the actual reading. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting that poetry can work on those different levels, that you can read it off the page and you need the words and you're taking in this personal experience. But when you put it to music, put it to video, something else sort of percolates inside it.
And I guess as well, there are, in that video, there is music, there is someone narrating. I guess the addition of the printed word on the page is another, maybe it's just a level too much. I'm not sure. Maybe it works in some instances, but in this case, I'm totally gobsmacked by it.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. It was an interesting process to make it because it's quite a pastiche of clips that I had to get together, and I had to search wide and low for a whole lot of, because if people listening to the podcast go onto the YouTube channel, they can watch the video, and it's set in a supermarket and it has all this footage that tries to capture the mood. But it was very much a jigsaw puzzle trying to put it together. But it was a great process. It was very enjoyable. It might be good just to start to bring our listeners up to speed on who you are as a poet. So, what's your background? When did you come into writing poetry? Just a little bit about your life and perhaps your work.
Yeah, I didn't start writing poetry until fairly recently. I think maybe 5 years ago or something like that. But prior to that, I was a memoir writer. So my first book was Poking Seaweed with a Stick, which is about growing up in Scotland. And I started writing that. Well, I didn't start writing a book. I was very bored in my life, and I wondered, how can I possibly make myself more windswept and interesting, to steal Billy Connolly's line, because I wasn't doing anything interesting at all, actually, or anything creative in my life at all. And something just occurred to me one day that I thought I should maybe try to do something more than what I'm currently doing, because I just had a regular day job. And so I went along to a local community college, and in those days, it sounds like I'm talking about 50 years ago, but it was only in 2005 or something. But in those days, you still got the brochure in the post from WEA Community College, And so I flicked through that, and I enrolled in a few things and tried different things: painting for beginners, photography for beginners, this and that. And I just didn't. None of that. I didn't do any of those things well, and they didn't ignite anything in me. And then, as a sort of last resort, really, I saw this thing called creative writing for beginners, and I really just thought, I'll give it a go. I've tried everything else and I'm crap at everything, so I'll try this. And so I went along for the first night, and it just blew the top of my head off. Just changed.
Well, you're certainly not crap at this, that's for sure. I found your work really dynamic, and you sent me a copy of your most recent work, so I've been looking through that and reading poems. And it's really interesting, your poetic style. I just had Mark Tredenick on the podcast in the last interview, and he's got a vastly different style from you. He's very melodic and probably more classical in his style, and he uses a lot of refined meters and stuff. But you're more reminiscent of Plath to me. You got like this kind of. It's almost like you're jazzing on the page. That's what it feels like to me. There's this sort of whiplash that you get from your poetry, and even some of the titles of some of the work. So your first work was it something about the crushed heart and a Coke can? It's an incredible line.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you tell me about that, because I find your style really, really interesting, and it feels really earthy to me, and kind of like the common person sort of poetry to me.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what it is, common person poetry, because at the end of the day, we're just all we're just all, I think at the end of the day, we are just all ordinary. I live my life from that perspective, and some of my friends don't like that I do that, because they don't, they might not think that every life is ordinary, but I think it is. And within that ordinariness is the gold, as far as I'm concerned. So, that is where the gold of the gold where I write my poems from. It's the nuggets of everyday boring drudgery, really. It's the go into the supermarket, get the shopping in, put in a load of washing. Those sorts of ideas and lines will come through my poems, because my poems seem to be, for whatever reason, rooted in that everyday ordinariness. I just think that's to be celebrated in a way, although...
Oh, absolutely. And I think you bring the beauty to it. But it also seems to me that you have this tendency to say things that I think people bury, or they're not prepared to say, and you say it in a way that's really fresh and kind of slaps you across the face, which I love. So taking images and sort of presenting them in this really unique sort of way. Is that something you sort of intentionally,
Yeah,
you're always looking for this,
to always
something that's electric or
looking for it, always 100% looking for it. My mantra is, how am I mean, at the end of the day, an emotion's an emotion is an emotion. So we can all sort of describe emotions. But my mantra is, how am I going to describe this in the most original way possible?
Yeah.
And typically that most original way for me will be, rooted in something very ordinary. So it'll be about, a fried egg or a can of baked beans or, so that is what I tell myself every time I sit down to write. I'll look at my lines and go, that's a really crap, boring line. Okay, well, how am I going to say that in the most original way I possibly can?
Yeah.
And hopefully, I also try to think of ways that are funny. I like to have humor in my poetry, and I guess that comes kind of intuitively in a way, because there's often very sad things going on in my poems, but I would kind of throw in a line.
Oh, there's plenty of humour in your poetry for sure, and there's a lot of darkness as well. It's quite a mixture, actually. It's quite intoxicating, indeed. But I suppose your style comes with a level of risk taking, I suppose.
Yeah, it does.
Because when you're looking for those lines and trying to push the envelope and boundary, you're pushing it closer to the point where it could not work. Do you find that when you're in the process of writing, do you have like an editor or somebody you bump ideas and someone who can really give it back to you and say, no, I can see what you're trying to do, but...
No, I never share anything unless it's finished as far as I'm concerned, and I'm the only person that I can satisfy. I have to satisfy myself, and then you put the work out into the world, and it will or won't work for other people, and my intention is never to offend, obviously. And as I write, if I find that little frisson of fear when I say, oh shit, can I really say that in the poem? I have to say it. That's...
Yeah, and that's the impression I get, that you have those moments where I can see that that's what you've done, and I kind of go, good on you, because a lot of us wouldn't have the courage to actually enter into that space, but it's so refreshing to see somebody embrace it. So I think it's a marvellous thing. Looking at the poem that we've played, I suppose it would be really good for the audience to have an idea, because it took me a while to. It was actually a discussion with you when things sort of fell into place where I understood the context. The context I thought was actually really important to unlocking this poem for me and actually taking me deeper into it. And you spoke to me about your father, and I don't know much. Like it's a very general understanding I've got, and the introduction said that it's a poem that's dealing with the death of your father. But I suppose it would be really good to hear a little bit about that background, and is it actually a retelling of a real experience, or is it actually a fictionalised sort of exploration of your feelings?
I think, the feelings in it are real. Obviously, the emotion of it is 100% real. And did I go into a supermarket while I was grieving? Yes, but it wasn't about a particular time in a supermarket as I was grieving. But at some stage in the process of my grief, that sort of goes on forever anyway, I just had this flash of pushing a supermarket trolley down an aisle and just grabbing baked beans, 2 fruits and syrup, Ajax, sadness. Oh, where did that come from? It's one of those moments. And then I just did the whole tour of the supermarket, throwing in these various emotions along with my everyday stuff: cat litter, dog food, tampons,
Yeah, well, so that really spoke to me, and it made me think broadly of the society that we live in as well, and where perhaps you could argue that people at any given time are probably impoverished with their ability to deal with emotions, and how emotions in our world today have become largely, to some point, commodified, and that the metaphor of the supermarket really represents a really good opportunity to explore that tension our modern lives of grabbing these ordinary everyday objects and then contrasting that with emotions. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that? I might be really off the mark here, but I was certainly hearing a political sort of dimension to the poem as well.
Yeah, you did mention that to me, and I hadn't been aware of it. But that is another level that you can set. I mean, that's the thing about poetry. It goes out into the world and it speaks to people in different ways, and you can't control that. And so whatever you intended as a poet may not be what lands in the ears and hearts of other people. But I think that is really interesting that, it's almost, you could argue that there is an element of we can buy everything these days, why not emotions? And also to what you said about a lot of people being unable to access those emotions in themselves. Like this the commodification of...
Yeah, and also like a supermarket is an overwhelming place. There's sensory overload that you experience there, and you don't know, sometimes you've got multiple choices, and when you're navigating your way through difficult emotional landscapes personally, maybe the experience is a little bit bewildering like that. There's so many, if you've got lost, but that brings up all these other emotions, and at any given point you could be at anywhere along that spectrum of emotions.
I think pushing the supermarket trolley, that image of that, and focusing on what's going into my trolley, I think for me in that poem, that brings a silence and it brings me into myself. But a supermarket is chaos, and it is 50 million products, and it's bright lights, and it's jostling, and it's crap music, but so within that chaos, and I guess what I'm trying to allude to, although it's very difficult to really understand your own work sometimes or to articulate what it's about, but it's something about the chaos that we live in every day, and yet inside that we've still got to navigate something. And on this particular day, we're navigating grief and trying to get the shopping in.
Yeah, and again, maybe you may not have meant it, but the pushing of the trolley. The trolley to me is like an object of burden, that gets weighed down by the objects that you accumulate.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That is one way of looking at it. And thinking about this podcast today, I could also see that the trolley is almost the person grieving, just kind of being pushed around, just going through the motions of getting through this. Thanks.
Yeah. And even the fluoro light, this idea that sort of when you go through a hard time like that, you are exposed to the world around you, that people know that you're going through that experience, and it does create a sense of vulnerability in your life. There's nowhere to hide at all.
Yeah, that's right. You still have to be part of the world.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. You do. Yeah, it's very interesting. The other thing that really drew my attention too was that you use second person narration a lot through the poem. Because you're talking about you do this and you do that. And to me, I thought that was great because, the more I thought about the poem and I listened, there's that real sense of detachment and alienation, this real inner struggle, and the use of just that simple narration. You can describe pain and anguish in lots of different ways, but then when you use a technique that's so, I don't know, it just seems really authentic to me that you're kind of disembodied from yourself as well.
Yeah,
it was really powerful. Do you want to talk? Was that intentional?
I don't know.
Choice?
I mean, I can't. The poem comes out as it comes out, and it so happens this come out with, you will this and you will that, you will then this and this and this, and there's something about the you. There is almost two yous in the poem. This you who's telling this story is telling the other you inside you, this is how the future's going to look. You will do this. Your father will die. You will go to the supermarket. And there's something, there's some kind of relationship between the sort of external self and the internal self, I think. Yeah, I think the external person is advising the internal person, this is what's going to happen. It'll be fine. It just has to.
Well, that's right. And again, you could make an argument that any given person, any given day, actually is two people in one.
Yeah,
is what there's that what you show to the world, and this other internal monologue.
Yeah, and
doubts, confusion.
That's right. And then you have the poem itself, which is almost like it's part of the collusion, if you want to call it that. The poem seems to hold a secret that you didn't know about. It seems that's the secret of your future.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah.
so as you push your trolley around, there's something telling you, some other voice, you will this and you will that, you know.
Well, it's interesting because the other way I read that, because that really makes sense to me. But again, thinking from a political point of view, that the whole machinery of our society and the supermarket is pushing products like you. It's saying you've got to feel this way, you've got to buy this thing. The you that, so I was thinking too that voice, I can hear that it's sort of in yourself, but it's also coming from your environment, which is fascinating.
That is
too.
interesting too. And I think also we, you know, to your point, which was never the intention in the poem, but I love it. And that is, we're all kind of exhausted with being sold to. We're all exhausted by the vast array of products that are going to change your lives. Well, they don't really change your life.
No.
But I find there's a great comfort in that knowledge, you know.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting with poetry too that, like you said, the second person wasn't intentional, but it's amazing how poems are organic in a way, partly, and they sort of stumble upon themselves. Because you can go back and you can write techniques back, and I'm sure you've seen lines that you haven't been happy with, and you said, "Oh no, I think a metaphor's the right thing to pop in there, and I just need to work it out." But do you want to talk about the process then of writing this poem? How did it actually come out? You said a few words about it, but is there anything you want to?
Yeah, I just think it came from a line that came from somewhere. Who knows where they come from? But it was, oh, if you have no eyes, where do the tears go? Like, where do, you know? It just, that seemed to me to be the most exciting and juicy thing to write down as a line.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And then from there, I think it, you know, I don't even know. I don't know how I got there.
Yeah, it's a fascinating poem, and it's really interesting at the start because there's this, there's this weight of emotion, and yet there's this comical bit where you're like this, the woman who's won the mad dash at the, and I love that sort of juxtaposition of that sort of, that should be a happy manic sort of, but the manicness here is deep, dark, horrible, difficult emotions. And so. What's your mind doing at that stage when you put that sort of thought in? Like, is that what it's just come out, or is it?
I mean, because there's also a sadness in those things. Somebody wins the thing at the local supermarket, and they go off and they try and get all the things into the supermarket. I find that, I mean, I don't know, that breaks my heart. Those kinds of things, that we kind of think that one thing is going to bring us any great amount of joy. And I'm not saying some things don't bring us a great amount of joy, but they're kind of banal things, and yet we all kind of hope one day we win the thing when we cut out the coupon in the supermarket,
That's right.
And so that kind of heart-aching sadness for me is, that comes through, I guess, in a lot of poems, but there's something about the ordinary banality of it. Somebody once said, actually, poet Maggie Gibson, my friend in Scotland, said once, Ali, your poems are daringly banal. And I love that so much, because I think they are, and it comes down to that, the woman who won the trolley dash at the supermarket, the man on the news says it was so hot out west that, someone fried an egg on a shovel. Those things to me make a poem come to life. Yeah,
but that's what I think makes your poetry quite attractive too, is that there's a level of humility in that approach, I think. And again, there's nothing probably worse than reading poetry than is clearly overworked and pretentious, and someone trying to force a vision out of their own ego, rather than just sort of a sense of abandonment in a poem that's trying to just be honest.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think honesty is vastly important to me. And also, I heard Paul Muldoon read and speak at Sydney Writers' Festival a few years ago, and something that he said I have sitting on my shoulder every day as I write, and he said that when you're writing a poem, it's important to know, but it's crucial to not know. So there's something about that getting out of your own way when you're writing a poem. Stay out of your way, don't drive it. You don't know where it's going to be. I mean, how many of us have sat down to write a poem that we thought was going to be about, I don't know, your mother, and it ended up about the Olympics or whatever. that's one of the exciting things about poetry for me. You don't know.
No, you don't. Yeah, and Seamus Heaney was similar. He was on about getting out of the way of a poem, making sure he was sort of like a steward, I suppose, and making sure he didn't, basically stuff it up.
Yeah.
But
It's about, don't impose censorship on yourself. I'll often say to people, write the poem that you know is going to offend someone if that's what you want to write. You can edit it back, but I think it's important to get it all out onto the page, warts and all. No one needs to see that.
Yeah.
And then,
I think that's right. That's right.
Don't stand in the way of it. Like, if you want to see that your neighbour's, leaf blowing drives you off your head every day, then say it in the poem. But you can maybe cut it back and change it if you want to. I kind of put those things in, and then I don't feel the need to change them. I'm happy to leave. Because for me, it's important to be daring and to not say, oh, should I say that? The minute I hear myself say that, you say, you're saying it. So you're saying it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Turning back to the poem, one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, Ali, was when I was reading through it, I was seeing this connection, and again, it might have just come out organically for you, but so some of the aisles or sections you were going through and the emotional landscapes that you were navigating. So I've got things such as, when you're going through the frozen sections, that's where forgiveness happens, and it, to me, that seems like you're stuck emotionally in the cold. And I love that sort of thing. There was another line, let me just bring it up, about regret. Yeah, it's got, and I love the harsh products that are here, like dog meat, cat litter, sardines. And I like sardines, but they also, some people think they stink.
Yeah.
And regret, like this. So I got this sort of real correlation between the items and the emotion.
Yeah.
I thought that was. So was that something that you just came out, or did you rework back into the poem? Or
I think, products just fell out, like the most banal products, 2 fruits and syrup, Ajax. Those are things from my childhood and my past. 2 fruits and syrup, corned beef. Those are things my father would have eaten and would have had in his cupboard, So there's that aspect to it. And then there's also the aspect of, I would have gone back and sort of tried to, tweak the products to kind of maybe be in line with the emotion. Yeah, definitely. The forgiveness is, obviously, forgiveness. Can I forgive him? That's the last.
It's such a beautiful part of the poem, I think, and the idea of the fog and sort of, wiping away the condensation.
Yeah.
It really just hovers in that moment.
The
poem seems to me really slow down.
Yeah, interesting.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, because there is a hovering. It's kind of like I'm reaching I'm going to reach into the freezer for the frozen disappointment. But at the last minute, I say, no, I want, disappointment is frozen. It will keep, its own ice. And I get, obviously that's, alluding to the fact that maybe in the future I will be able to forgive.
Yeah.
Well,
there can be pressure sometimes. I know when loved ones pass and maybe there was difficulties in the relationship, and there can be a pressure to find some sort of sense of closure and forgiveness. But I imagine often the case is more like this, that you can see that desire to get there, but it's not the time, or there's more seasons to go through in the process. Is that sort of...
Yeah, and I think also I'd say that forgiveness isn't even necessarily a definite thing. I could forgive someone, or my father, let's say, one day, and then maybe the next day I won't forgive him again. That's okay too. I don't necessarily, I don't at all think that grief is sort of linear, beautifully choreographed dance.
No, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I've experienced that with people and myself, where you do get it. Sense of I've forgiven you, but then you, like a couple of years later, you have a moment where you're taken back to some event and you go, no, I haven't forgiven them at all.
They'll hate you. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's also something that became apparent to me the more I wrote about grief, was that, because prior to writing about death, I think I imagined, and many people in my life hadn't died at that stage, but that grief was about sadness, which it is. It is also about anger, and it is also about regret, and it is also about disappointment, and it's also about happiness, I guess. And it's about there's so much in grief.
Yeah, well, that's one of the questions I had for you actually. That those almost like those stages of grieving really come out, and you have sadness, disappointment, anger, a little regret, forgiveness, and it goes on. So I suppose that takes us to another question about is poetry therapy, or is that part of what when you get wrapped up in writing a poem? Is it just because you're, like you said before, you're inspired, the line comes to you, and it's just, maybe you are even bored or something like that? Or is it also a way of...
I think any writing that I do is always about the act of making art, always. I have a therapist. I've been having therapy for 20 years, so I can take care of that in the therapist's office. I've never felt that my writing was therapeutic. I mean, from the perspective of those types of situations that we're talking about, the love of a father or not. I mean, for some reason, I just love taking these emotions and these situations and sort of putting them on a table in front of me almost, and just picking them apart and picking them apart and picking them apart until I've got something on the page that just feels so good to me. And I love having written. And I feel a certain sadness when the poem is over, because I now need to start another one. But for me, it's almost about this is what I do every day. So I can't be in therapy every day. But I don't. I mean, I say that the poems. I don't feel in my body anywhere where that sense of catharsis lives. Having written a poem, I just don't feel it. I feel excited when I've managed to wrestle a poem to the floor and nail it. I feel so joyous that I can achieve that.
Deep sense of satisfaction in that.
100%, and it's kind of like I've written that now, and it never occurs to me or that I've processed something in myself that I wouldn't otherwise have processed.
Yeah. But I think, you're hitting on something here I think is perhaps really important because there'll be budding poets and writers out there, but perhaps listening to the podcast, is that getting wrapped up in that process seems to take you to places that are really enjoyable and real for you. And that might be the actual trigger that does inspire you and help you to write. I certainly know that if you go into writing and poetry more from the side of you're thinking about your audience, or you're thinking about the message you're giving to somebody else, that can be problematic, I think.
I think Charles Bukowski said something along those lines. The minute you start to write for an audience or an editor, you are fucked. So, and I don't know, I read that very early on, but I get, at the end of the day, as I said before, I need to be happy with what I've written, and I know enough to know now that the poem will go out and speak to, maybe, some people, but not all people. It just can't. But when you first start writing, you hope that the world will adore you. And then when you finally realise that the world can't adore you, the world in its entirety can't, it's devastating, but you must.
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah. And it's like that with poetry, perhaps even more so. And it's kind of like music to me, that, you think about all the different styles of music, and you put like classical in front of some people and they'll just go, I hate that, just turn it off, please. My ears are bleeding. And it's like that with poetry. About, so you'll have different styles, and some will really just connect with people, and people will go, I don't understand, I can't hear the music, it's just not doing it for me.
Yeah.
And that's just, you just got to accept that's the way we're different.
And what I will say to people who say that same thing to me is, I'll say, you just haven't found a poet that you love yet. The minute you do, because poetry generally, I was certainly someone who spent most of my life saying I hate it, and then I found one poet that I thought, oh my God, what is this?
So that wasn't Bukowski, was it?
It was, the first poem that I read that I thought, oh my God, it was a John Berryman, Life, Friends, is boring, we must not say so. I quote that poem so often, but my God, every time I think about it, I watch him read it so often on YouTube. It just makes the hairs on my body stand on end. It's extraordinary. So there's that. But, sometimes I will say the same thing to people that, if you say you hate poetry, do you also hate music? And they'll say, no, of course I don't hate music. And I say, well, within that umbrella of music, there's rock, jazz, classical, la, 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 la. Choose one of them. It's the same with poetry.
And I think a lot of the problem is just that people haven't actually been exposed to much poetry, and what they have been exposed to is usually from primary school and high school, and it comes in very sort of predictable, cliched sort of forms, and it's just not for them.
And there are ideas and old ideas that don't speak to most of our everyday experience, of the washing and hanging out the washing on the line and going to the supermarket.
Yeah. It's interesting. Last season, because I teach students, and I did a poem, "The Seven Circles of Earth," which is sort of a play on Dante's Nine Circles of Hell. But the poet, who's a gay man, and the poem's about two gay men in Texas who got burnt alive. But the poem is written as footnotes. It's written in the footnotes. So the poem is actually blank, and then the kids just, something happened with them when we were doing that poem. I don't think I've ever had so much success in a class with a poem, because they understood that if you're consigned to the footnotes, your voice is nothing. And then they started completely getting right into it, and they could see the art in it, and the beauty in it, pain in it.
It's a beautiful poem. Yeah. It's an extraordinary piece of work, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. So I think it's about perhaps people just being exposed to exactly what you're saying, which is important.
Yeah.
Couple of lines, I suppose. I'm just trying to identify some of the ones that I wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah, I really love when you get to it's got like shades of light and dark, this poem. So it's got that slowness and the beauty of the frozen section. And then when you get down to the strawberry ice cream and, maybe trying to, deal with things by getting things that are pleasurable, and the 10 tubs of comfort, the coconut froyo. Yeah. So you don't know exactly what it is. It sounds like it might be happiness. Can you tell me about that line? Because that one I just love. I just got this sort of sense of this confusion and
that's right. Happiness. And I think that speaks exactly to how I feel about coconut froyo. It sounds like something that would just bring you great joy. Froyo. How those two words, froyo, well, one word, two words, whatever it is, feel in your mouth as you say them. That froyo. I mean, what is it? Joyful.
It's joy, of course.
And you look at those things in the supermarket, and it's like strawberry ice cream, whatever the other thing was I said, coconut froyo. And as I write that, the coconut froyo, though you do not know what it is, it sounds like it might be happiness. That just comes from that kind of place of unconsciousness. That line just continues on because that is the truth of it. And I think that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying don't stand in the way of that. So you could have said, get, ice cream, frozen something else, and coconut froyo, full stop. It wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, no, and I can admit. It's interesting with the video. I managed to get a bit where a person was stopping and looking at the package, and I get that moment of sort of you're going down the aisles in this constant stream, but here, bang, there's this moment, this other moment, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Of course, I had to look up the word tannoy because I assume that's a colloquialism from Scotland, is it? Because I know it's a brand of speakers, so I have to look it up.
So in the UK, you will say, tannoy for assistance, or, did you hear the tannoy announcement? So it didn't occur to me that it wasn't a thing.
No. I had to look at it and go, oh my God, where's that from? That's a cultural reference I don't understand, but I got there in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just think just mentioning again that line about coconut froyo, though you do not know what it is. I just want to say again that's, I think, where when you just let your pen keep going, it will help transform a line. Don't be scared to sound stupid. I like to show myself in a bad light in many of my poems. I think that's also a good thing today to do.
Yeah.
No,
That self-deprecation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're never. Is it sort of punching up, as they say? You're always. I'm always punching down on myself, and that's important. To just.
You also seem to be comfortable in yourself being able to laugh at yourself as well, though.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah. I'm not special. I like to remind myself I'm not special.
Yeah. Well, it's good advice for writing, I think, just writing those lines out and see where they'll take you.
Yeah.
Which is another consideration, I think. I think John Marsden talks about the fact that he's a young adult fiction writer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
No.
But he talks about how there's three main ways that people often write. Two of them, which I'll mention here, is like the bricklayer. So they'll, and I imagine lots of poets are like this, that they write a line and they just sculpt that line until it's perfect, and they won't go on, or, well, they might write a few, but they'll be constantly sort of, and it's a very laborious, and if you're writing fiction, that's very, very difficult way to be, and a lot of people like that. So he used to be that. Writing in that sort of way and being very unproductive. And then he learnt to embrace what he called, I think it was like the oil painting or watercolour version, which is basically you just put your pen on the paper and you just let it go. You don't stop, you don't edit, you don't look backwards, and then you just see what sort of mess comes out. Yeah. Then you go back and you sort of, does that sort of relate to your style or?
I mean, typically a line will arrive, and so you write it down, and it might be a year later that you go back to that line, but you're kind of keeping it there, as so there is a whole collection of those lines, and then the day that you choose to, like some days a poem the bones of it will come out, in 5 minutes, so, but then it might take, sorry?
I was just going to say, so have you got a journal where you keep little ideas that you accumulate over time?
Oh yeah, like scraps of paper, and also a file on my computer, of course, with ideas, my ideas file line. Yeah. And so I will start to either, I'll get the bones of a poem down inside 5 or 10 minutes maybe, and then it will take me 3 months to actually make it into something that I think is work. So basically I'm just writing down the sentences that I'm going to then turn into a poem, So that would just be the first step in that particular example. And then other examples of how I write would be that I've got a line which I think is so good, I have to put a whole poem around it. And so, and there will be a feeling and a message around that line. It's not just a line, but so, yeah. And then I'll just go through the process of just put it down as badly as it goes down. Like, try not to judge that. Just put it down. The man walked into a shop and bought a packet of cigarettes. He then walked to, so it's going to be boring and it's going to be banal, but how are you going to say that in the most creative way you possibly can, the most original way you possibly can? And then it is a case of going back line by line and each line and, that verb, why did I use that verb? That's so crap. Get the thesaurus out. Oh, there's a really juicy word, and...
But you have to be self-critical. I mean, the ability to actually say that is crap. It's really important, isn't it?
I think so. But I mean, I think most writers do fear that their work is crap. I mean, you hear that all the time, that this is no good, I'm no good. But I myself think, what I'm writing might be crap, but I'm going to enjoy it anyway. And I'm going to see where it goes. And that's how I just live it. I just don't... I don't know that it's going to be a great poem, but I'm going to make it the best poem I possibly can for whatever reason I've chosen to do that with my life. So that's what I love to do.
Yeah, great. Great. Excellent. So, Ali, have you got any other work that you're working on?
Yeah. I'm just finishing a third poetry manuscript. So I'm just working hard on that. And then I have a second memoir on the go. So
okay.
Yeah.
Can we expect as a provocative title as the last one?
The second memoir or the collection?
Yeah.
Both of them.
The memoir.
The memoir, and currently that memoir is called Andrew's Snack Van Tour of Scotland, which is about my brother and I travelling around Scotland, and me going back after a long period of absence and reconnecting with the landscape and the food and the sense of humour. But my brother is someone who knows the location of those little caravan snack vans in Scotland. We were driving through the countryside, and he will sort of take a sharp left-hand turn, go over a river and across a bridge and down into a valley, and there's a little snack van caravan with this little chimney, and it's making burgers and stuff. That seemed to me like such an extraordinary thing that I decided that
that is
the memoir would be punctuated with stops at these various snack vans around Scotland, and they're in strange places. But it's it's about going back after a long period of absence and that next phase of life. So.
And is there plans to go back? I know, like with COVID and everything, it must be a disaster. Were you meant to be here in Australia for such a?
No, I was meant to be there in May 2020. The Coke can collection was meant to be being launched in Scotland, a UK edition. So obviously that was cancelled. We hoped it would happen this year. It's not going to happen in 2021. So yeah, I'm hoping in 2022.
So do you traditionally sort of move freely between those two locations and live in both?
I've been in Australia for 25 years, and for the first 15 years I didn't leave Australia. I didn't go anywhere, certainly not back to Scotland. That's the last place I wanted to go. And then the older you get, and and things happen, and your father dies, and then there's a pull to go back to your roots, so yeah, that pull is there very, very strongly since these last 5 years. So if we hadn't had the pandemic, I would have tried to get there and be there for some months. So we would have been there now. But, so be it. We're all stuck.
Yeah. In fact, I think I read a poem that you might have published somewhere about the pandemic just recently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I take a swipe at Albert Camus.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah. I did see that floating around in some publication. What was that published in?
It was published in a Scottish lit journal called Gitanjali, which it's Gitanjali and Beyond. So it's there. Yeah.
Oh, we might see that in the next collection, maybe.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
Well, Ali, it's been great talking to you today.
Thank you.
Really, and thank you for the opportunity to work on one of your poems. It's brings me such delight, and the thought of bringing a bigger audience to your work, and it's just terrific.
Thank you.
You deserve to be read, and hopefully people can get as much out of your work as I have.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, James. It's a joy. Thank you.
So it's time to wrap up this week's episode and say goodbye. Next week we'll be looking at one of the world's most famous poems of all time, Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. To stay notified of upcoming episodes, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And of course, a wonderful video clip of today's poem by Ali Whitelock is now available for viewing on our YouTube channel. For other resources, visit our website at www.litpoetry.com. In a fortnight, we'll be interviewing prominent contemporary poet Kevin Hart, who's currently living in the USA, and will feature some of his work. So make sure you tune in. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
If you have no eyes, where do the tears go? By Ali Whitelock. The emotions are half price on Tuesdays. You are lured in after your father's funeral by the fluoro lights, bright as the mushroom cloud you're not meant to look directly into, lest it burn the eyes right out of your fucking head. If you have no eyes, where do the tears go? You go inside, pull your collar up, sink your unexpectedly wet base into the V of your jumper. Make like the woman who cut the coupon from the newspaper and won the 3-minute trolley dash at the local supermarket. Take a trolley that does not require the coin you never have. On your mark, get set, go. Aisle 1. Baked beans, corned beef, 2 fruits and syrup. Sadness. Move quickly. Sadness is on special. Take a dozen cans. Check date. Make sure it has long best before. Aisle 2. Ajax, Napisan, stain remover, disappointment. Throw in a dozen cans of disappointment. Reconsider. Take spares. Aisle 3. Toothpaste, mouthwash, sanitary towels, anger. Empty shelves of anger. Get second trolley. Advise girl on tannoy you will need assistance to the car. Aisle 4. Dog meat, cat litter, sardines, regret. Throw in a few, but then again too few to mention. Turn out of aisle 4, past the yogurts culturing better days, the free-range eggs in their supermarket cage, the low-fat cottage cheese you used to buy in your teens when you were trying to disappear. Aisle 5. Frozen peas, dim sum, Linda McCartney hot dogs, forgiveness. Seeping from freezers like fog, wipe a circle in the condensation on the glass door. Press your eye up against it. Stare in at the piles of forgiveness stacked neatly in convenient 250-gram blocks. Open the door. Take a single block in your hand. It is lighter than you imagined. Turn to your trolley, already overflowing with the anger and rage, the disappointment and the hardly any regret, and consign the 250-gram block of forgiveness back to its fog. Aisle 6. Strawberry ice cream, coconut froyo, lemon sorbet, comfort. Take 10 tubs of comfort, 2 of the sorbet, 4 of the coconut froyo, though you do not really know what froyo is. It sounds like it might be happiness. Make way to checkout. Pile half-price emotions on conveyor belt. Pay your bill. The girl tannoys for car assistance. Once in your car, you momentarily consider going back for even just one single block of forgiveness. You decide against it. Turn the key in your ignition. Head for the exit. Forgiveness is on ice. You know it will keep.
You've been listening to the Lit Poetry Podcast, presented by James Laidler. For more podcasts, poetry videos, and other useful resources, visit our website at www.litpoetry.com. Thanks for listening.